Hey friends, welcome to the Fierce Calling Podcast, where I am talking with guests who are taking action where their passion, compassion, and conviction intersect. You're listening to episode 217. Today we're talking about faith, fiction, and the beauty of our unfinished stories with my guest, Kristen Hogrefe Parnell. And you're going to enjoy this episode. It's going to really encourage, inspire, and challenge you. So friend, I want to also mention that if you are looking for a speaker for your next women's event, check out my speaker page at womenspeakers.com or my speaking page at dorisswift.com. And I'd love to have a chat with you about that. And I am booking for 2026 and into 2027. So friends, thank you. And I'd love to come and have a chat with you and also encourage your ladies. So yeah, today we are going to talk about the power of Christian fiction to reflect real life stories, joys, and the messy, beautiful reality of unfinished stories, both on the page and in our lives. And so we're going to talk a lot about things that affect all of us. And we just want to encourage those who are listening that God's unique timeline is something that we all experience and we can trust because his ways are higher and he is good. So friend, I hope you'll enjoy this episode as I have a chat with Kristen Hogrefe Parnell. What is threatening to steal your joy? What is it that feels so heavy right now that you could barely stand? God has a plan, and his plan is to surrender it. Surrender it to him. It might be a prodigal. It might be a relationship, a marriage, something with your job. So many things. We have so many amazing blessings, but there are so many things in our life that threaten to steal our joy. I'm Doris Swift, author of the award-winning 6-week Bible study, Surrender the Joy Stealers, Rediscover the Jesus Joy in You. And it helps women rediscover the overflowing, ever-present Jesus joy within. Using personal and biblical stories, I share how you can identify your joy stealers, surrender them to God, reawaken the joy within, and share the joy with others. You can do it on your own or with a group. Check it out, friends. Surrender the Joy Stealers. Rediscover the Jesus joy in you. It's available on all the online retailers. It's time to take your joy back. Welcome back to the show. So glad to have you listening in today. And I'm excited to welcome back my friend, Kristen Hogrefe Parnell. And you're going to love what she has to share. And I do also love on her website where it says where faith and adventure intersect, because you know I love that word intersect, because we talk about where our passion, compassion, and conviction intersect, which is our fierce calling. But Kristen is an award-winning author who writes suspenseful fiction from a faith perspective. So I think that is very cool. And she writes for women and young adults. She's a former English teacher, so you know her writing is pretty quality. She probably has high standards for herself. And she also designs curriculum for a Christian academy. So I think that is very cool. She lives in Florida with her husband and their young son. And we're going to talk a lot about her books. She has a book series called the Crossroads Suspense, I think, if I'm getting that correct. And she's got 3 books out with that, but each could be like a standalone as well. So if you love fiction, that's a good place to go grab some fiction. And we're going to talk about that and also her unpublished picture book that won an award. So we want to talk about that too. And other things. We're going to talk about waiting and all the things. So welcome to the show. It's great to have you back, Kristen.
Thanks so much, Doris. It's so great to be back.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to having you back on, and it's been a while because you were episode 128, and I'll put the link in the show notes so people can listen to that, because each time when I have a guest for the first time, it's amazing, and then whenever I have a repeat guest come back, there's just so much that happens in our lives between the episodes. So we might review things that we might have talked about before or not, but things are fresh and different, and sometimes our perspectives shift, and we just learn so much more, and we keep growing because we're sanctified day by day, and
Amen.
Jesus, and we need help. We need God's help for that in that department.
Yes.
But anyway, so we were talking a lot about writing and things before we started recording, and fiction. I always joke because I've had several different fiction writers on the show, and it's kind of funny because we share God's truth, but yet
Yes.
we could write fiction, and it's like it's not an oxymoron. We can kind of intersect that faith in the characters and all that. So I would love if you would share a little bit about your story, and also where you're currently taking action, where your passion, compassion, and conviction intersect.
Thank you, Doris. And yeah, I love that question that you ask pretty much all of your guests. And maybe someone's wondering, fiction, well, how does that intersect with your compassion and your conviction? So that's such a neat question. I would say fiction, like you were talking about, it's such a vehicle for producing and showing real life truth, but in a non-confrontational way. And that's what I love about it, because you take these characters who are, make believe, but so often they reflect our own struggles, our own human experiences. And so I like to just take that and show the truth through a story that people are probably going to relate to in some way. You
Hmm.
give these characters longings, you give them dreams and hopes, and we all have those things. And so how does God work in their fictional stories that can give us encouragement for our own real life stories? So
Yeah.
that's part of my passion, and compassion is just to show people Jesus, through those stories. Um, he says, he told his disciples, I came so that you might have life and have it more abundantly. Well, what does that abundant like look like? We discover that in our own lives, my characters, because I write Christian fiction, they come to discover that in some way as well. So that's the intersection of those three things for me.
Thank you. What a great answer. And yeah, in fiction, I used to read a lot more fiction, and I want to get back into it because it's just, we love to watch movies and things, but the book can go into so much more detail, even when you watch a movie that came from a book, which,
Right.
eventually that might happen with your books. Who knows? So I had Karen Kingsbury on the show, and
Ooh.
lots of her books are are movies, so it's kind of cool. That was quite a few years ago, but that book that you read, you could take it with you, and you just kind of can relate to a lot of what the characters might be going through. You could maybe see some of yourself in some of the characters in the book, and so I think that's really exciting and cool. And it takes a lot of work. Like sometimes people might read a book and not really realize how in depth, because we were talking earlier about how I've got this novel that I've been writing that's been kind of in a Dropbox somewhere for quite
Sure.
a number of years, but I know for myself that I would need more work in like learning the craft and art of fiction writing, because it's different
Hmm.
than nonfiction. And so if there's someone listening out there, because we kind of know statistically there's a lot of people out there who want to write a book or feel like there's a book in
Hmm.
them, whether it be a memoir about an experience they went through, or because they love fiction and they want to write it. Um, how do you go about in developing your character, and how do you pick their names and different other things like that that you could share that would encourage someone right now to who either wants to maybe write or just loves reading?
That's such a good question. And there's so many different ways to answer it, because it is a process. But I would say best practices, first of all, get plugged into a writing group who, you know, with other fiction writers. So that's always a piece of advice, because as a former teacher, I still have students at my school, even though I'm not in a teaching role, come out and ask me, oh, I want to write a book. What do I do? And I'm like, oh, I wish there were just a really easy answer, but it's not. So I always say get plugged into a writing group, read extensively in the genre that you want to write, and then like you were saying, practice the craft of writing. So how do you write a round, developed character? And for me, that process starts with usually something I wouldn't say necessarily have in common because my characters are very different than I am, but something I can relate to them in some way. So, for example, my heroine in Watch Your Back is a very, very different person than I am. She's a private investigator. I'm a stay at home, part time working mom. She is self made. She doesn't want anything to do with God because her earthly father walked out of her life. So, why would she want a heavenly father?
Mm.
So we're very different. But I was like, what do we have in common? And the bottom line is we both fear failure. She is so fearful that she is not going to be able to take down the mob boss who is responsible for killing her former foster brother. And that is her whole mission in setting up her private agency, is to bring this man to justice. And she just fails over and over again. People she loves they get hurt in the process, and she's trying to pick up the pieces of those situations. And honestly, it's God's way of breaking her down to the point of she has to realize she needs him. Like she cannot do this on her own. And thank goodness I don't have a mob boss in my life.
Right?
But we all have fears of failure. Is my story, is anyone going to relate to it? Are they going to pick it up and read it? Am I going to be able to write while raising a toddler? know, we all have fears of I'm not doing this well enough. Or even as
Mhm.
moms, we have mom guilt. We have, the list goes on and on. So I find something that I can relate to in that character. And then she becomes a person to me. She's not just a one dimensional person, she has a personality. And then you think about her backstory. How does that impact the choices she makes today, how she relates to people? So, um, that's part of my process, is finding at least one thing, and usually it's the longing. If I can relate to them in some way on their longing or their fear, then they become really more than just on a page, a character on a page.
Yeah. And that really comes out in your writing, and that people can just get into it
Mhm.
and kind of step away from just like their everyday stuff and just kind of immerse themselves in the story and see, where the road takes. But I love how there are these elements of faith
Mhm.
in the book, and how your character, like you were saying, you're not a private investigator or whatever she
Definitely
is.
not.
I mean, I think mom's so qualified
I
in
mean, in some
some
ways,
fashion
definitely.
because we can usually find out where the kids are, what's going on, all the things. We like details, and we like to know stuff, but then having these characters who find faith, and it can help us too, like if we have people in our lives who maybe have that type of personality, and maybe how did they find faith, or what did
Right.
they, how did they arrive at this? And it can help us to like say, oh, that reminds me, because usually when you read something you go, oh, that reminds me of so and so.
Mhm.
And so it can help in those ways too. So it's for enjoyment reading, and since your novels
Of
are
course.
suspense, so that's fun. So that's good. But also to have takeaways,
Mhm.
and and then it's like clean, you know.
Yes,
So
100%.
hmm so that is important, because we want to be able to read things and not have to like think, this is going to compromise my
Mhm.
values, and just kind of to be able to feel comfortable sharing about it, or giving a copy to
Right.
someone, and know that it's an inspirational kind of a thing, and an encouragement, and there's faith woven throughout the pages. So I love that about it. And so that's why people are like, fiction, that's not like real. And it's like,
Mhm.
no, but it kind of is, because we're sharing real
Right.
faith, right? So that is good. And I know when you were talking earlier, and we'll talk a little bit more about the different books in the series, but you were talking about earlier waiting, and we kind of talked a little bit about that before we started recording for the show. And I think that your story is encouraging, regarding you and your husband. And so, if you would
Mhm.
share a little bit about that, I think that would encourage someone listening today.
Of course. Yes, waiting. I think we all experience it in some way, shape, or form. But and that also ties into my writing because before I was married, I primarily wrote young adult fiction because that was my audience. I'm a teacher, I have students. So those are also suspenseful stories. But as God wrote my own love story, I really felt He was also calling me to write for women now that I
Mm.
could more fully understand the beauty of His design and romantic love. And yes, as you were saying, I had to wait. I was in my early 30s, waiting for God's choice for me. And I will say it was more of an active waiting. I wasn't just sitting around every Sunday in the same pew. I was going to Bible studies. I was looking for service opportunities with people my age. And in today's culture where it's so almost isolating in the sense that everyone's behind a computer screen,
Mm-hmm.
really getting out there and doing new experiences, meeting new people. You never know how God is going to write your story. And mine, I met my husband washing hubcaps at an outreach for single moms. It was a back to school event, and the young adults, they called us young adults. We were like career adults, but they called us young adults. We were all, business or um, pursuing master's degrees or something. And this was our outreach to the single moms in the church. And so I got on hubcap duty with these two or three other guys, and there was I did not know he was my husband at the time. I was like, oh, he's way too cool for me. I'm just gonna wash my hubcaps. And he's like, no, let me show you how to use this pressure washer. And I'm like, oh, okay. So he was so friendly and outgoing, and just took the initiative and inviting me. I
Mm.
think the next thing he did was invite me to Ken Ham. Was in town. He's like, hey, we should like go see him together. And I'm like, okay. So again, one thing just led to another, but God did that. My if I had written my own story, it would not have looked anything like this. I would have met him in my 20s. Probably I would have come up with this whole fictional setting. As a writer, I like to be in control. I like to know where this plot is going. And it gets really
Mhm.
frustrating when writer's block hits and I don't know that. But the same is also true in my personal life. Sometimes we hit these walls and we don't know what the next step's going to be. And God's like, you got to wait. You got to wait for me to move you from this job to another place. Or you got to wait for me to meet the person I have for you. Or you've got to wait then to start a family. There's so many times God calls us to wait. And I'd like to say it gets easier, but it really doesn't. Who said, I think it may have been Elizabeth Elliot, could have been somebody said, waiting on God must begin every day as if it had never been started. You have to do it every day. And I know I didn't quote that right, and I'm not quite sure who said it, but it's so true. You just, every day has to be a bring it to God, wait on the Lord, be of good courage. He's going to strengthen your heart, and you don't know what it's going to look like. But that's where the faith and the trust comes in because ultimately He's going to write a better story than you could have. And that's
Yeah.
coming to someone who writes stories.
Amen to that. Amen to that. And what a profound statement, quote that you said, that it's true. And we are continually waiting on something, whether it be a spouse or a change in our job or, like a book to get published, or even trying to find someone who would be an agent, or a
Mhm.
prodigal, praying for a prodigal to
Right.
come back to the fold. And, there's so many things that we do wait on. And sometimes God's timing is like shorter and longer, but his timing is not the same as ours. So we have to also take that into consideration. And for waiting is so important. And time again, we hear and experience our own stories of how waiting was well worth it. It was worth the
Right.
wait. And had we had our answer to prayer, when we wanted, it wouldn't have been as sweet or looked the same. Something would have been maybe missing, And so I love how you kind of laid that out, and the fact being that you've transitioned from young adults, you have young adults books that you've written, and now you're ministering to women through your books, and I love that so much. And so are there pretty much the same solid characters that you have in the series, but then you introduce new characters in, right?
Yes. So each of the books can be read as a standalone. They make more sense as part of the series, but they follow a different couple from Crossroads Church. So they may not both be at that church initially, though. One might be a prodigal, very much, or never even met the Lord yet. But there's a character from that Crossroads Church that it all intersects. Their experience gets drawn together. They get pulled into the adventure or they volunteer to help. So you'll see the cast from book 1 as secondary characters in books 2 and 3. So if you fall in love with cast from book 1, you get to see them again, but it's not their story then in book 2. It's somebody else's book story in book 2 and 3.
That's kind of cool because it keeps things fresh and,
Mm-hmm.
new. And then you have like a new thing that you kind of can learn about with these new
Mm-hmm.
characters. But your beloved ones are still around. So that's
Right.
cool. It kind of reminds me, too. I love that it's Crossroads. There, years ago, my uncle, who was a pastor, he had Crossroad ministry, and we were kind of part of that. It was more of an outreach type of ministry,
Okay.
and so it kind of reminds me of that, which I love. And so, but thank you for sharing your story about waiting, on your husband, and also fact being that now you can write from a place that you understand
Mm-hmm.
and that you've been there and you are there. And so it's very relatable. So when you first started writing fiction, I know it was young adults.
Mm-hmm.
So was it like, did you present a proposal at a writer's conference, or how did that start? And then was it a different process when you transitioned then to writing for women?
Ooh, such a good question. And the publishing world I'm, my first book was published, I believe, in 2010. I was just talking to my husband about that last night, and so much has changed. I ended up self-publishing my very first series, which is now kind of archived. But my current young adult dystopian series, I met it, and again, it's such a God thing. You go to a conference, you pitch to publishers or agents and editors, and you hear stories. Oh, I sold my first book at a conference and I signed right there. That has never been my experience. God has always worked behind the scenes. And I'm super happy for anyone who has had that experience, but that hasn't been mine. I took a class on fiction with an author, and she was just purely delightful. And she said, "Oh, well, this is my publisher. I'll introduce you." And so she introduced me to her publisher, and that's who ended up publishing my young adult fiction book. But I never met that publisher in person. It's always been through email or phone calls. So they weren't at the conference, but one of their authors was. So that's how that story came about. And then that was a small press. And then my current women's series, my agent helped me find them. And again, I didn't meet my agent at a conference either. I met her through a Twitter pitch. So, you know, I look at all of my best laid plans, and I am a planner.
Mhm.
I am a planner from day one to now. But none of my plans really work out the way I think they're going to. And I think that is just God's way of being like, remember who's in control here, Kristen. You like to plan. And I know there's a Bible verse about that. The heart of man plans his way, but the Lord prepares his steps.
Mhm.
And it's so true. We are supposed to be faithful and to our best work, but ultimately, at the end of the day, the outcome is totally up to God. So, yeah, I've spanned from self-publishing to traditional publishing to getting an agent to then getting my current publisher that way.
Mm. Wow, cool. I love that. And it's funny too because God, created us and knitted us together and
Mhm.
knows everything about us, knows our hearts, and like he has a sense of humor too. And so it's like, well, Kristen likes to be in control. Let's just see how we can do this a way she would not expect.
So true.
Yeah, because there's really not like, this is the norm, kind of thing. And even people that have like what appears to be like an overnight success or whatever, we know that's not even true. Like that's not a thing. I mean, every so often there'll be like a random viral something or other. But it's usually like a result of years and years of doing the thing, like learning the craft, no matter what it is. It could be writing, it could be something else. It's like, God helps equip us in all different ways. And even in the jobs that we might have had in the past, he uses those things and equips us for what he has planned for us to continue to do, or maybe something brand new that we have no idea, is not even on our radar. So that's kind of exciting. We always have these adventures that we can have with God, and we never really know what the next step is, but he's there. And I love that scripture that you quoted, because I use that a lot too. It's like that, we can make our plans, but, he directs our steps. When we trust in him and when we submit to him and like follow his, what he wants us to do. So I love that so much. And the fun thing is too, is that you have a little 3-year-old.
I do.
Which is so fun. And so you have now like ventured into writing for children too. Mm-hmm. And you recently won an award, which is cool, for the it's the ACFW Kidlit. So it's American Christian Fiction Writers Kidlit. And it was actually like a writing contest thing. I don't know if you would call it contest, but that you would enter something that you hadn't published yet, right?
Right.
So they were kind of looking for fresh, new, something that has not been yet published. So that was cool. So can you tell us a little bit about it? I know it's called Not Much Lunch. So
yes.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, like you said, God takes you different places, and you just, I always remember someone saying, you got to just try the door handle. Maybe God's going to keep it locked, but maybe it's going to open. And so that's kind of where I'm at with my kids' lit. I went ahead and I entered this unpublished picture book called Not Much Lunch, which is a biblical fiction on Jesus feeding the 5,000, about a little boy named Jacob who learns that little is much when God is in it. And so I entered that not really knowing if am I on the right track or not? And then I was just so excited that it did place second in that contest. And so my wonderful agent is still talking to publishers. We don't have a publisher for it yet.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, again, that's kind of where the faith comes in. You give what you've got to God. Like that little boy, he just had his, loaves and fishes, and it was barely enough for him to eat. But he gave it to God, and God multiplied it. Jesus, they had 12 basketfuls left over. So it's kind of also an analogy for my children's fiction right now. I'm just giving. This is what I have. And I wrote another story. I gave that to my agent too, because my son's like, I want a spaceship story, Mama. And I was like, I can't really find a spaceship story on Amazon, so I'm going to just write you a spaceship story. So it's neat how God uses the different seasons in your life to use those to hopefully bless other people, but if not, to just grow you to trust him. Like, are you gonna be faithful with what I've given you, and then leave it up to me how I want to multiply that? So yeah, I'm hopeful for Not Much Lunch and this little spaceship story, but I really don't know. That's up to God.
Well, they sound fantastic to me, and good principle and lessons, that we can all glean from, which, I've spoken to other writers of children's books too, and, have commented that adults want to like to read what it is, because kids want to continually have you read it over and over and over. So I feel like
yes,
you have to like it too. So that's good. But and oftentimes, because you brought up a really good point when you were explaining how your son, wanted a spaceship book, but there wasn't one. So a lot of times when we write something, it's because there's a need for it, and we can't find it somewhere else like that.
Exactly.
And so, maybe God is calling whoever's listening right now, like there's something that you have a need and you can't find a resource, or you can't find something that you would hope to have in the season of your life, or maybe you developed something that you needed and now you're on the other side of it, and that there's other people that also are going through that. And and so, as the word says, we're comforted, and then we can in turn comfort others with the comfort that we've received from the Lord. So that is so good. And I love that you have these stories of things not happening the usual way, and that you had to wait, and it's God's timing, and you're still waiting on these things to come to pass. But the fact being that I think maybe not even necessarily the older we get, like it may not have anything to do with age, but I think it has to do with our faith age, like our spiritual maturity, maybe I could say. As we mature more, grow more spiritually mature, and kind of learn how God has been faithful, and that it's not necessarily all about us, and we make it about us a lot of times, but it's about him, and we're part of his big picture story. And there's a whole nother big picture out there that we're part of, and we're just blessed to be a part of. And it just is very humbling when we think about it, and that we even get to do things that we get to do, which is amazing and awesome, and be able to share his love with others. So I love that you have this calling in this ministry, and it's just so good. And just trusting that God will lead and direct. So some good advice, some of the things that you shared is, step out there. If you have something, enter contests, whatever. I mean, if you don't win or you get feedback, that's valuable right there. And also, do they still do the pitch parties? I guess it's called X now.
Yeah, I know. I still call it Twitter. I can't. I know it's X. It's like Facebook is Meta. I still call it Facebook.
Oh, right. I do too. Okay.
But I think so. I think they do. And just to tie in with that, I don't know. I get encouraged when I hear from people who are unfinished. We have, yes, it's nice to be on the other side of something and say, this is how God saw me through it. And that gives us hope that, okay, I'm going to get through this too. But there's also something equally encouraging about someone who has an unfinished story, because they're right there with you. Your story is unfinished. Or I remember one of my favorite nonfiction authors is Nicole Sosowski. I'm not sure if I'm saying her last name right. And she wrote just such, What If It's Wonderful? That's one of her books. And she went through a long season of infertility and miscarriage, and I had a miscarriage. So that just really spoke to my heart back in the day. But one of her books, her story wasn't done. She published this book, and this was her journey, and she didn't know the answer. She didn't know that God was going to give her 3 children when that book was published. She didn't know that. And it was so encouraging to me that she still walked in faith without knowing the end of that story. And so I think, if you're listening and you're like, yeah, I don't know where my story's going, I think God's got so many crazy plot twists right now. I don't see how they're going to have a resolution. And trust me, I feel that way sometimes too. But just knowing that in the unfinished, in the messy, God's still there and he's still working, and he knows what the outcome is. So just taking comfort in that. Just the unfinished. It doesn't have to be finished to be something God's using and can use.
Wow. That is some golden nuggets right there. That is something that somebody listening needed to hear. I mean, we all need to hear that. And that could be a book title. Living your unfinished life or something like that. I don't know. You can weave it into one of your books or something like that. But it's true. And I love how you said that, because sometimes we tend to live our life like, when are we going to arrive? When is this going to be complete? I mean, we're always looking for completion, but God in Christ, we're complete in him. And the whole thing about, I don't feel like I'm enough and all of that. And it's like, well, we're not enough, and that's okay.
Right.
We're enough in him. He's enough for all of us. And so, there's so many ways to shine our faith through that in the struggles that we all can relate to, that we all deal with, because there's so many common threads. Even though our stories may be very different, there's a lot of common threads and ways that we can just like be in community with people, because we were created for community. And so I love that. And I believe too in the episode, and I'll share the link, I think I said that earlier, in the show notes of the one we had before. I believe you do share your miscarriage story, and and that's powerful, and it really touched a lot of hearts. And so you can go back and listen to that. I'll have the link in the show notes, so you can listen to that other episode as well with Kristen. But so going forward, how has this grown you? I mean, you're a writer, and of course, you're probably seeing growth in your writing as you go. But how about, your own personal spiritual growth and faith?
Yeah, that's because you can't have one without the other. You can't
Yeah,
produce fruit without staying close to the vine. And Jesus
exactly.
said, I'm the vine and you're the branches, and don't get those roles mixed up. Even though I'm pretty sure I do that sometimes. So yeah, and I will say, in a season of having a young child, it is hard to find those quiet places and those quiet moments. So many mornings when I have my very cold coffee because it's gotten cold, and I'm sitting down in my quiet place and my son's playing, and he's like, "Mommy, what's mommy doing?" I'm like, "I'm reading my Bible, or I'm trying to." And then he'll just climb up on my lap, and I want to read my Bible too. So then we'll get his little Bible out. And so sometimes it's just reading his Bible with him, and going, what is that picture? Oh, that's the Tower of Babel. And, talking through that. So, I'd love to say that I could spend an hour in the Word and Bible study, and that's not my season. But that's okay, because God, sometimes I'll hear something come out of my mouth to tell my son, and I am so convicted. He'll be in a store with me. I want something, mommy. I want a toy. And I'm like, no, no, we have enough toys at home. We need to be content with what we have. And I'm like, oh, ouch.
Right?
Mommy's not
Yeah,
content
preaching
right
to the
now. Here I
choir.
am.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, so yeah, but being aware, and being sensitive and having a soft heart, to what God's trying to teach you, that can happen in any season, regardless of how much intentional Bible study time. Sometimes it's podcasts. When I actually get to go to the gym, I was listening to your podcast episode with Kate Battistelli and Rebecca George while I have my 30-minute mom time workout. And, you just have to get creative with where are you going, like when you have
Mm-hmm.
those moments to feed into your soul. So listening to a podcast like this one, listening to an audiobook, getting the Bible read to you, pursuing a mom, like now I'm in a season of moms groups,
Mm.
trying to find those places where I can, like you said, you have to surround yourself with people. You can't do this life alone. So that would be my challenge to anyone who's like, I just don't have time, is like, find your people, find your community, and make sure they're close to Jesus so that you can also stay close to Jesus in these busy, unexpected seasons of life.
Yeah. Wow. That was a great answer. That is so true.
I'm trying to remember
And
what the question was, but
well, you answered it. It was good. But yeah. And thank you for listening to the other episodes, because that's encouraging. Sometimes when you write books or you do podcasts, you wonder, like, who is out there? Like, is this just going out into the, like, whatever airwaves? Is anybody actually, like, getting anything from it or whatever?
oh,
And
we
then it's
are,
like,
we are. Keep up the good faith. Those were some great episodes.
aw, thank you. And then we have to just stop and say, hey, you know what? It doesn't matter, like, if one person listens or a million people listen,
Mhm.
because we can tend to get caught up in numbers and book sales and,
Yes.
how many of this and how many of that, and kind of comparison, which is not healthy. And so when we think about the fact being that we just need to show up and be obedient, like, to what God is
Mhm.
calling us to do. Like, just show up and do it, and whatever He wants to do with it. And I love you brought up that chapter in the Bible of John 15, because that's what my Bible study is rooted in. John 15, talking all about, the vine and the branches and all, and bearing fruit. And what does that mean and what does it look like? But mainly taking you through a journey of surrendering what threatens to steal your joy to becoming healthy disciples that do bear much fruit. But he produces the fruit. We don't have to.
Right.
Which is cool. We could just trust him with it. I kind of share a story in the Bible study about my friend Annie, and she has a food ministry, Feed My Sheep, and she makes jelly, but she didn't make the grapes. She makes the jelly from the grapes, the fruit that God has produced. And so just thinking about it from that perspective, I think it's very freeing. Don't you think? It's very freeing when we don't put it all on
It doesn't all
ourselves.
depend on us. It all depends on God.
And it's hard, if you do try to be in control. And you do write these stories and you like to know where they're going. Like I'm more of a what they call it, pantser or whatever, where I don't plot, I just let it write itself. And then it's kind of funny because I'll be writing along, and this is like something I've just it's not actually a serious thing yet. I haven't done, but when I was writing this fiction novel and I'm like, I would say, wait, what happened? It's like I'm reading it, I don't know what's going to happen. So it's kind of fun, but it can also be a little disjointed if you don't wrap up I don't know, how do you write down all the little subplots going on to make sure that you tie up any loose ends out there? Or
That's a great question. And like you said, there's seat of your pants, pantsters, we call them, writing, and there are plotters, hardcore plotters. They've got everything outlined, every detail. And then there's hybrids, which is kind of where I fall in. And as I have less time to write with my sweet toddler, I kind of find myself hybrid to pantster. I always want to start out with a synopsis, so I have a general idea of where it's going. But then as I start writing, the story tends to take on its own life. So I hope to have at least a plot point of where I'm going. But as far as those plot holes, we got to make sure we answer those questions that we have prompted our readers to ask. So keeping track of those, sometimes I'll have sticky notes, sometimes I'll just add a comment come back and fill this in later, so that I know when I check my comments, I'll come back and make sure that I've addressed it. Or my wonderful, beta readers will be like, you never fixed this. This doesn't make any sense. So definitely seeking out that, writing critique feedback comes in very helpful.
yeah.
But yeah, depending on your style, and there's not one that's better than another. And whether you're a hardcore outliner or you write by the seat of your pants, both of them produce such good stories. So, and that's also neat because God made each of us different. We each go about it differently, and that gives us our own voice and our characters their own adventures. So, you gotta keep going on with this novel, Doris. I wanna know about it. So next time we chat, I want an update.
I would love it. It's funny. I kind of joked. I think I mentioned it on another show, but I have a secret Pinterest board of when my novel becomes a movie, and then I picked all these characters, actors and stuff, and to play the characters. But now I've got to revisit it because that was years ago, and so I don't know if some of those actors and actresses would still be they're a little older like me, so I don't know if that would work. But they might be able to play a different role. But anyway, but I love earlier how you were sharing that that's the season that you're in right now, and I think if we can just be a little bit more give ourselves grace and just say, okay, this is the season I'm in. So let's live in the season we're in instead of trying to live in a season we're not in, because that never works really well. But to look at these things as okay, these are divine appointments, divine things that happen throughout our day that we might look at as interruptions, which I don't know if that was Rebecca George or I had somebody on the show. We were talking about that, about divine interruptions. But anyway, so, and I'm sorry, one of my guests listening, it was them, and I didn't name it. But anyway, so go listen to all the episodes so you can figure it out, right? So if you're listening and you haven't heard that episode, go find it. But that is kind of how we should approach. And when we're talking about plotters and pantsers and those kind of things, sometimes that's how I mean, we can definitely live our lives that way. Some people are plotters. Some people, it seems like they're just living by the seat of their pants, like flying
Mhm.
by the seat of their pants or however. And sometimes we can put like labels on people and judge them
Mm,
in those ways. Like maybe we
yes.
have a kid or a family member or a friend who always seems to be flighty with no direction. But we can't like discount the fact that if God's leading them, or we're praying that they will seek God's direction, we can't
Mhm.
really say that they're, not going to end up where they're supposed to be.
Right. Right. They're
Mhm.
just different. And that's something, going back to like the whole marriage. I mean, when you go into premarital counseling and then after you get married, hopefully join a married couples class at church. I remember one of the first couple studies we did with our class was talking about, I forget, I think it was planners and free spirits. The free spirit spouse is the one who, doesn't like to have notes and organization, and they just want to hit the road with a tank of gas and see where it leads them, versus the planner
Mhm.
wants to have a detailed itinerary. And it's so funny because in almost every case, the husband or the wife is one or the other. They're not the same. And that's part of sanctification. That's how God works.
Amen.
But it has taught me a lot. Um, that my way isn't always the right way. There's
Mm.
not just one right way. I'm the planner. My husband is the free spirit. But
Mhm.
he has so much more joy, versus I'm Martha over here stressing out about everything I've got to do versus Mary, to use the Mary and Martha analogy. She's sitting at Jesus's feet just enjoying being in his presence.
Yeah.
So there's a time and a place for each one. But so yeah, to your point, one's not necessarily right, and because somebody's path doesn't look the same as yours, doesn't mean God's not getting them to where they need to be. They still need that community, they still need the accountability, but their journey might be different, and your
Yeah.
journey might be different too. So,
Yeah. I love that because marriage too. Bringing up the fact that we were talking about marriage and the classes you went through and everything. It's true because marriage is like a dance. You can't
mhm,
like you can't both lead at the same time or whatever,
mm-mm,
and so we can kind of like look at it as, we don't necessarily have to compromise, but we have to learn to sometimes bend a little bit. And the communication is so important. And the fact being that, like, for example, I know like my husband, he's kind of more of an analytical mind, and he does like to plan like this is where we're going to go and how many miles is it going to be and this and that, which I mean that's important because you want to make sure you have enough gas or that you have a
right.
destination. But then I'm kind of more like I like to just go or not necessarily have all the plans in place, but I find that sometimes I will plan that way because I know that that's what he would want, where are we
Yeah.
going and what are we doing. But there was one time where it was kind of fun that I'm originally from New Jersey, but I moved to Florida in ninth grade. So I'm basically a
Okay.
Floridian. I think
Yeah.
they've kind of grafted me in, kind of like, we were grafted in the Bible. But anyway, so as the Gentiles. But we got in the car one time, which was very out of character, really, for my husband, I would think. But our daughter had never seen snow. I don't know if she
Mm,
was like 13, 12. She was, she wasn't little. And so we let her also bring a friend. And we just got in the car and drove north until we found snow. And that was kind
oh,
of, and it sticks in my mind. One, one reason because it was the first time she kind of got to play in it and see it and all that. But another reason is because it was like just kind of like an adventure and like nothing was really planned much. And we just kept going until we found snow. And where we actually found snow, I want to say it was like South Carolina. It was some kind of a place that didn't normally have snow. So it was
yeah.
kind of a new adventure for them too. And, we thought, well, we can't just even go to the store and get a sled or whatever because they don't stock that
I don't
stuff
even
here.
sell sleds here.
They didn't, yeah, like they didn't have the snow plows for the streets. So it was kind of
Mhm.
like the whole city had to shut down. I don't remember exactly. He'll remember though, because he has a great analytical mind. He remembers so
Mhm.
much detail, and he could tell you right now probably where we actually stayed. But so that was kind of fun. But just to remember that, and and so And just kind of circling back to spiritually speaking, I mean, we believe that Jesus is the only way. Like,
Right.
he's the way, the truth, and the life. So there's nobody that gets to the Father but through him. So we believe Jesus is the only way. So it's not like we're saying all paths lead to God, because that's
Right.
not biblical. But we're saying that we are all created uniquely and differently, and that we do have different personalities. And you're right. It's like when you have two people that come together, it's kind of funny how opposites can attract. Or if you're too much alike, sometimes that could be another different learning curve. So anyway, I'm glad you brought that up. And I love that, because that class sounds exactly like we were talking about, the fiction type writing. So that kind of tied
Again,
right in
fiction
there.
mirrors real life.
It does. So we can dispel that myth of that, fiction and Christian can't go together. I mean,
Yeah.
we're sharing the
Let's
truth.
dispel it.
Exactly. Let's dispel that. We were sharing the truth, but we are, letting people kind of, I mean, God's a creative. He created everything. He's a creative, so we're creatives. And even if you're listening today and you don't feel like you're very creative, you are. There's some creativity in you, and maybe you just haven't found it yet. But expressing creativity is like, right, Kristen? Because when you're in your wheelhouse, like when you're in the middle of this and you're like, wow, like you have finished it.
Right.
It's kind of like you birthed a child or something.
It does feel that way after a novel.
Yeah, so that's exciting. So we're going to be praying for you for this
Thank you.
children's book, and the two children's books actually, for the right place that they will land. And I love that. So I think I said it earlier. Yeah, step out and enter contests, or go on and pitch stuff. And the worst people could say is no. But like you said, maybe you just needed to
good
juggle
feedback.
that handle.
Yeah. You might just need to try the doorknob,
Yeah,
and
you
maybe
get the
it'll
feedback.
open.
Exactly.
And if it doesn't, go try another one.
Or sometimes how our doors in our house, like you could use like a hairpin or something to open the doors.
Yep.
Like, don't do that. Just,
No.
wait for God to actually open it. But yeah, try the handle, because you just never know. It's kind of like reminds me of, gosh, what was that show? I don't know. There was a show where you had to, maybe it was Gordon Ramsay's show or something, where at the end, the chef that won, like, would try the handle and the door would open. Like, that's such an analogy. But anyway, it wasn't the best show to watch. Okay. He's sometimes he's a little bit, I mean, they bleep him out, but
They bleep him, yes.
he's a little rough.
But his food looks so
he's a great
good.
chef. It does. It's very good. So anyway, well, I love this. This has been such a great conversation, and I'm just, I was thankful to have you back on the show, and I hope to have you back again sometime.
Well, thank you. It's been so fun to be back.
Yeah, this is so fun. And so if you could share with the listener how they can connect with you and find your books and any other resources that you have that you would want to share.
Sure. So my name is a mouthful. So just check out Doris's show notes, KristenHogrefe Parnell.com. And you can find my books there. They're on Amazon, other booksellers as well. And if you sign up for my monthly newsletter, I do give away a free novella that introduces the setting for my Crossroads Suspense. So it's only monthly. I'm not going to bombard your inbox, but I'd love to connect with you through my website and newsletter.
So good. Thank you. And yep, I will. I'll have those links in the show notes so you can connect with Kristen. And I know that if you're listening, that there was something in this conversation that you needed to hear today, that you were supposed to hear today. I just don't think there's anything that happens by accident. And so I know that what Kristen shared really encouraged you. And so, friends, this has been amazing, and I hope you'll join me next time when I talk with another guest who's taking action where her passion, compassion, and conviction intersect. Until then, friends, have a blessed week, and I'll talk to you soon.